The observatory deck of the Kronos keepsake hummed with the soft blue glow of quantum sensors as Archivist Taylor Voss pressed her palm against the viewing portal. Beyond the reinforced transparent steel, the cosmos stretched endlessly, a tapestry of stars that had inspired countless civilizations to reach beyond their worlds. But where the Kepler-7 star cluster should have blazed with brilliant white light, there was only darkness. "Computer, magnify Sector 77 Alpha," Taylor commanded, her voice carrying the measured tone of someone who had spent decades cataloging the universe's secrets. The holographic display materialized before her, showing what the Galactic Archive's deep space sensors had detected 3 rotations ago, a spreading void where 13 star systems had simply ceased to exist, not collapsed into black holes, not exploded into supernovas, just gone, as if someone had reached into reality and erased them with divine fingers. Taylor's reflection stared back at her from the portal, angular features marked by the ritual scars of her home world, Zirian Prime, silver hair pulled back in traditional archivist knot, and eyes the color of deep space itself. At 47 standard years, she was considered young for an archivist of her rank, but her expertise in temporal anomalies had earned her this assignment. Archivist Voss, the ship's AI announced in his melodious tenor, "We are approaching the boundary of the phenomenon. Recommend reducing to sublight speeds. Acknowledge, drop us out of hyperspace, and engage full sensor arrays." The familiar sensation of dimensional shift rippled through her body as the Kronos keepsake returned to normal space. Immediately, alarms began chiming throughout the bridge. "Warning," the AI continued. "Detecting severe gravitational anomalies ahead. Space-time distortion readings are off standard scales." Taylor moved to the central command console, her fingers dancing across the holographic interface with practiced precision. As lead temporal archivist of the Galactic Archive, she had investigated dozens of anomalies, pocket dimensions, time loops, causality breaks, but nothing like this. The void ahead wasn't empty space. It was the absence of space itself, a wound in reality that seemed to pulse with malevolent hunger. Her instruments detected gravitational waves unlike anything in the Archive's vast databases, patterns that suggested not destruction but extraction, as if someone was pulling matter and energy from this dimension into another. Computer cross-referenced these readings with archive files on dimensional incursions. Processing. No matches found in primary databases. Expanding search to theoretical physics archives and restricted xenoarchaeological files. While the AI worked, Taylor studied the sensor data more closely. The missing star systems hadn't simply vanished. They had been excised with surgical precision, leaving behind perfectly spherical voids in space-time. Whatever was responsible possessed technology far beyond anything the Galactic Archive had encountered in its 10,000-year history. "Search complete," the AI announced. One partial match found in the restricted Xenotech archives. File designation, Omega Black 7. Warning. This file requires level Omega clearance to access. Taylor frowned. She held level Alpha clearance, which was supposed to grant access to all but the most sensitive archive materials. Omega-level files were reserved for information deemed potentially catastrophic to galactic civilization. Override authorization. Temporal Emergency Protocol 779. Archive Supreme Command gave me carte blanche for this investigation. Authorization accepted. Accessing Omega Black 7. The holographic display shifted, revealing a file stamped with warnings in 17 different languages. As Taylor read, her blood grew cold. The file contained fragmentary reports from the ancient Kithra civilization, a species that had achieved time travel before mysteriously vanishing from the galaxy 12,000 years ago. According to their records, they had discovered shadow realms, pocket universes where time flowed in reverse, sustained by harvesting matter and energy from the primary timeline. But the Kithra had detected something even more disturbing. These shadow realms were not natural phenomena. They were created by beings from the far future, entities that had transcended physical existence and viewed linear time as a limitation to be overcome. These beings, which the Kithra called the retro-architects, were systematically harvesting past timelines to fuel their existence in the deep future. Computer, how old is this data? File creation date, approximately 11,700 years ago. Last access, never. A chill ran down Taylor's spine. If the Kithra records were accurate, then the Black Zone wasn't just a localized threat. It was the beginning of a temporal harvest that could unravel the entire timeline. Long-range sensors are detecting an artificial structure at the heart of the anomaly, the AI reported. Configuration unknown, but it appears to be the source of the space-time distortions. Taylor enlarged the display, revealing a geometric impossibility, a structure that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, its surface shifting between solid matter and pure energy. It was beautiful and terrifying, like a crystallized scream frozen in the void. "That's our target," she said, her voice steady despite the fear growing in her chest. "Plot an approach vector. We're going in. Archivist Voss, I must strongly advise against entering the anomaly. The gravitational stresses alone could tear the ship apart." "Our orders are clear, computer. The archive needs to know what we're dealing with." She paused, watching the alien structure pulse with otherworldly light. "Besides, if the Kithra records are accurate, running away won't save us. This phenomenon will keep spreading until it consumes everything." As the Chronos keepsake moved toward the boundary of the Black Zone, reality began to behave strangely. The stars outside shifted position without the ship changing course. The chronometer on the bridge ran backward for several seconds before resuming normal function. Most disturbing of all, Taylor could swear she saw her reflection in the viewing portal moving independently, as if it existed in a slightly different timeline. Approaching event horizon, the AI announced, its voice beginning to distort. "Recommend immediate." The transmission cut off as darkness swallowed them whole. Taylor woke to the sound of backwards rain. That was the only way her mind could process what she was hearing. Thousands of droplets pulling themselves up from the floor to the ceiling in perfect reverse motion, each one glowing with an inner light that seemed to come from tomorrow rather than today. She lay on the deck of what had been the bridge of the Chronos keepsake. But everything was wrong. The walls curved in directions that hurt to look at directly, and the familiar blue glow of her ship's systems had been replaced by a sickly yellow light that seemed to emanate from the metal itself. "Computer?" she called out, pushing herself to her feet. Her body felt strange, as if she were moving through thick liquid, while her thoughts raced ahead of her actions. "Immediately retreat. Ship's systems are—" came the AI's voice, but the words were arriving in reverse order, the end of its warning preceding the beginning. Taylor stumbled to the command console, which now displayed readings that made no sense. According to the instruments, they had been in this place for -7 hours, and the ship's energy reserves were increasing rather than depleting. The external sensors showed not empty void, but a vast structure surrounding them, the inside of the impossible geometry she had observed from outside the Black Zone. As her vision cleared, she realized she was not alone. 3 figures stood at the far end of the bridge, but they were unlike any beings she had ever encountered. The first appeared to be made of crystallized time itself, its body shifting between past and future moments, showing what had been and what would become in a constant, nauseating flux. The second was her exact opposite. Where Taylor was solid and present, this being seemed to exist in negative space, a hole in reality shaped like a person. The third defied description entirely, its form constantly rewriting itself as if someone were editing its existence in real time. "You arrive," said the crystalline being, its voice echoing with temporal harmonics. "You will arrive. You have arrived. All timelines converge in this moment place." The negative space figure stepped forward, and Taylor felt a chill that went deeper than cold. "Another archivist," it said, its voice like the absence of sound. "Come to preserve what should be forgotten. Your kind never learns." "Who are you?" Taylor demanded, reaching for the quantum stunner at her belt. The weapon felt sluggish in her hand, as if the trigger had to travel backward through time before it could fire forward. "We are what you will become," said the third being, its words arriving before it opened its mouth. "I am Archivist Zephyr the Nexian Collective, from the timeline where the Galactic Archive conquers entropy itself. My companion is Archivist Vexera of the Null Archives, from the timeline where preservation becomes destruction, and our crystalline friend is Archivist Tamrian, from the timeline where past and future collapse into eternal now." Taylor's mind reeled. "You're from different timelines?" But that's impossible. Parallel dimensions can't interact. Impossible in your linear reality, Zephyr interrupted. Here, in the inverse archive, all possibilities exist simultaneously. We are the echoes of your future, the shadows of your past, the dreams of what might have been. The retro-architects built this place, Vexera added, gesturing to the impossible architecture surrounding them, a nexus where time flows in all directions at once. They harvest temporal energy from collapsing timelines to fuel their existence beyond linear time. Tamrion's crystalline form shifted, showing Taylor glimpses of possible futures. Her ship destroyed, the galaxy consumed by spreading black zones. Civilizations had never existed because their timelines had been harvested before they could begin. But why bring us here? Taylor asked, what do they want with archivists? Knowledge. All three said in unison. Their voices creating a harmony that made reality shiver. We are the keepers of information, the preservers of truth. In a place where past and future intersect, knowledge becomes power beyond measure. Zephyr stepped closer, and Taylor could see that its constantly shifting form was actually composed of living data, algorithms and equations that writhed like serpents beneath its skin. The retro-architects require archivists to catalog their harvested timelines. We have been here for, will be here for. The concept of duration has no meaning in this place. How long? Taylor pressed. I arrived yesterday, Vexera said with bitter laughter. In the timeline where tomorrow comes before today. Zephyr will arrive next week, in the timeline where effect precedes cause. Tamrion has always been here, in the timeline where time is a circle eating its own tail. And now I'm trapped here too, Taylor realized, the full horror of her situation beginning to sink in. Trapped. Tamrion's form flickered through a dozen different configurations. You misunderstand. We are not prisoners. We are components. The retro-architects don't just harvest timelines. They harvest the information those timelines contain. And who better to process that information than those trained to preserve it? The bridge around them suddenly shifted, walls flowing like liquid mercury, before forming into a vast library that stretched in directions that shouldn't exist. Shelves of impossible height held volumes that contained entire civilizations, their histories compressed into quantum data streams that whisper with the voices of the dead. Behold the inverse archive, Zephyr said with something that might have been pride or despair. Every book that was never written, every discovery that was never made, every thought that was never thought, all preserved here in the space between moments. Taylor walked among the shelves, her archivist training overwhelming her fear. The volumes called to her, each one containing knowledge that could revolutionize understanding of the universe. She reached for one, a thick tome bound in what looked like crystallized starlight, and immediately jerked her hand back as visions flooded her mind. She saw a civilization of pure mathematics, beings who had transcended physical existence to become living equations. She witnessed their discovery of the fundamental code underlying reality itself, and their horror as they realized that something was rewriting that code from outside time. She experienced their final moments as their timeline was harvested, their mathematical souls compressed into data and stored in this impossible library. Overwhelming, isn't it? Vexera said, appearing beside her like a shadow cast by absent light. The weight of infinite knowledge. The burden of preserving what should remain forgotten. This is monstrous, Taylor whispered. These are entire civilizations, reduced to data. And yet, Zephyr observed, is this not the ultimate archive? Perfect preservation, eternal accessibility, knowledge freed from the constraints of linear time. At what cost? Taylor turned to face the three other archivists. How many billions of lives are contained in these books? How many universes have been destroyed to build this place? An irrelevant question, Tamrion said, its form cycling through configurations that show different perspectives on the same truth. In the inverse archive, death and life are simply different states of information. The civilizations here aren't destroyed. They're transformed into something greater. You sound like you believe that, Taylor said, studying the crystalline being's shifting features. For a moment, Tamrion's form stabilized, showing her something that might have been its original appearance, a tall, elegant being with her arms and eyes like captured galaxies. Belief is a luxury we cannot afford, it said quietly. We do what we must to survive. The retro-architects are beyond our comprehension, beyond our ability to resist. We catalog their harvests, we maintain their library, and in return, we continue to exist. Existence without purpose, Vexera added bitterly. Preservation without meaning. We are the living dead, curators of oblivion. A deep vibration ran through the inverse archive. An impossible architecture around them shifted once again. Where moments before they had stood in a library, now they found themselves in what could only be described as a factory, a vast complex of machinery that operated on principles that violated everything Taylor understood about physics. Temporal energy flowed through crystalline conduits like liquid light, while massive processors the size of moons converted harvested timelines into pure information. At the center of it all stood a being that hurt to look at directly, a retro-architect in its native form. It was beautiful and terrible, a creature of living paradox that existed in multiple timelines simultaneously. Its body was composed of crystallized causality, its thoughts visible as geometric patterns that rewrote reality with each conceptual shift. When it spoke, its voice came from the past and future simultaneously, creating an echo that seemed to originate from the beginning and end of time itself. The new archivist integrates well, it said, its attention falling on Taylor like the weight of eternity. You will assist in cataloging Timeline Harvest 777 Alpha. The knowledge of 12 civilizations requires processing. I won't help you, Taylor said, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. I won't be part of this genocide. The retro-architect's form shifted, and suddenly Taylor could see herself from his perspective, a mode of linear time, constrained by causality, limited by mortality. To this being, she was less than an insect, a brief flicker of organized matter that would be forgotten long before the universe grew cold. Choice is an illusion of linear time, it said. In the inverse archive, all possibilities exist simultaneously. You will help us willingly. You will help us unwillingly. You will refuse to help us. All timelines converge on the same outcome. Then why do you need us at all? Taylor challenged. If you can manipulate time itself, why require archivists? The retro-architect paused, and for a moment, Taylor glimpsed something unexpected in its alien features. Loneliness. Knowledge without context is merely data, it said finally. We can harvest information, but we cannot understand its meaning. We exist beyond linear time, but meaning requires perspective of those trapped within it. So we're not just catalogers, Taylor realized. We're interpreters. You need us to make sense of what you're stealing. Stealing. The retro-architect's form flickered with what might have been amusement. We preserve what would otherwise be lost to entropy. When the universe reaches its heat death, when the last star burns out and the final black hole evaporates, the inverse archive will remain. Every thought, every dream, every moment of joy and sorrow will be preserved here for eternity. Preserved as data, Vexera said bitterly, not as living experience. What is life but a pattern of information? The retro-architect replied. What is consciousness but organized data processing? We offer immortality to all existence, not the crude immortality of preventing death, but the true immortality of existence beyond time itself. The factory around them shifted again, and Taylor found herself standing before a massive display showing the spread of black zones throughout the galaxy. Dozens of them had appeared in the past week alone, each one harvesting star systems with ruthless efficiency. This is just the beginning, the retro-architect continued. Soon, all timelines will converge in the inverse archive. Past, present, and future will become one eternal moment of perfect preservation. And then what? Taylor asked, what happens after you've harvested everything? For the first time, the retro-architect seemed uncertain. Its form flickered between configurations, as if it were consulting timelines that hadn't been written yet. Then we will understand, it said finally, the purpose of existence, the meaning of a universe, the reason why something exists rather than nothing. All answers lie in a complete archive of all possibilities. Or maybe, Taylor said quietly, the meaning is in the living, not the recording. Maybe by harvesting everything, you're destroying the very thing you're trying to understand. The retro architect's attention focused on her with uncomfortable intensity. An interesting hypothesis, it said. We will test it by comparing the archived versions of civilizations with their living counterparts. Your timeline will provide excellent data. With that pronouncement, the being vanished, leaving Taylor alone with the three other archivists in a space that had once again become something else. This time, a laboratory where fragments of harvested realities were dissected and analyzed. Welcome to your new existence, Zephyr said with grim humor. Hope you weren't too attached to linear causality. How long have you been fighting this? Taylor asked. Fighting? Vexera laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Who said anything about fighting? We learned long ago that resistance is futile. The retro-architects exist outside our comprehension. They see all timelines simultaneously, know all possible outcomes. Any plan we make, they've already seen and countered. But that's only true if we think linearly, Taylor said slowly, an idea beginning to form. What if we don't plan? What if we act spontaneously, without thought or preparation? Tamrion's crystalline form shifted, showing configurations of possibility. Chaos theory, it mused. Random actions creating unpredictable outcomes. But even randomness follows patterns when viewed from outside time. Not randomness, Taylor corrected. Paradox. If this place exists outside normal causality, then maybe we can use that against them, create a situation where the solution requires the problem, where escape requires imprisonment. She looked around at the impossible laboratory, her mind racing with possibilities. Somewhere in this temporal maze was her ship, the Chronos Keepsake, with its archive-built systems and quantum databases. If she could reach it, if she could find a way to reverse the flow of causality itself. You're thinking of trying to escape, Vexera observed. We've all tried. The inverse archive is a closed loop. Every exit leads back to the entrance. Every future circles back to the past. Then maybe we need to break the loop, Taylor said, not by going forward or backward, but by going sideways, into a timeline that doesn't exist yet. The three other archivists exchanged looks that managed to convey volumes despite their alien natures. Impossible, Zephyr said. Timelines can't be created, only harvested. Are you certain about that? Taylor asked, or is that just what the retro-architects want you to believe? Before anyone could answer, the laboratory around them began to shake. An alarm sounded in harmonics that suggested emergency across multiple dimensions. Through the transparent walls, Taylor could see the impossible machinery of the inverse archive shuddering, as if something were interfering with its operation. What's happening? She demanded. Tamrion's form cycled through configurations of alarm and confusion. Unknown. The timeline stabilizers are fluctuating. Something is creating temporal interference. From where? From nowhere, Vexera said. It's negative space forms seeming to flicker in and out of existence. From a timeline that doesn't exist. This is impossible. But even as they spoke, cracks began to appear in the walls of the laboratory. Not physical cracks, but breaks in causality itself, through which Taylor could glimpse fragments of something unprecedented. A timeline where the inverse archive had never been built, where the retro-architects had never existed, where the galaxy continued its natural evolution undisturbed. Someone's fighting back, Taylor realized. Someone who shouldn't exist is creating a timeline that contradicts this one. The question was, who? And more importantly, how could they help? The cracks in reality widened, and through them spilled something that shouldn't have been possible. Temporal refugees. They came in waves. Beings from timelines that were in the process of being harvested, their existence caught between what was and what would be. Taylor watched in amazement as creatures of pure crystallized time materialized in the laboratory, their forms shifting between multiple states of being. The first to stabilize was a woman who looked remarkably like Taylor herself, but older, with scars that told stories of battles fought across multiple timelines. She wore the uniform of a Galactic Archive archivist, but one modified with temporal shielding that crackled with quantum energy. Taylor Voss, the woman said, her voice carrying harmonics from multiple timelines. I'm Taylor Voss, from the timeline where you succeed. That's impossible, Taylor said, even as she stared at her own face. Parallel versions can't exist in the same space-time. "They can in the inverse archive," her older self replied. "This place is a nexus where all impossibilities become possible. I'm from Timeline Delta 7, where you discovered how to weaponize Paradox itself." More figures materialize around them, other versions of the archivist she had met, but from timelines where they had made different choices. There was a version of Zephyr that had rejected the retroarchitect's offer and been transformed into living data as punishment. A version of Vexera that had found a way to exist in positive space rather than negative. A version of Temrian that had learned to stabilize its temporal flux and become a being of singular moment rather than infinite possibility. How is this possible? The original Zephyr asked, its form flickering with confusion. "The Paradox Engine," said the alternate Vexera, its positive space existence radiating warmth instead of cold. "We've been building it across multiple timelines, using the retroarchitect's own technology against them." The older Taylor activated a device that looked like a crystallized equation, and suddenly the laboratory around them became transparent, revealing the true scope of what was happening. Throughout the inverse archive, reality was fracturing as alternate timelines bled through into the central nexus. The impossible machinery that maintained the temporal factory was overloading, trying to process paradoxes that couldn't be resolved. "The retroarchitects see all possible timelines," the older Taylor explained, "but they can only process them sequentially, even with their advanced technology. We've created a situation where infinite paradoxes are happening simultaneously, overloading their processing capacity." "But how?" Taylor demanded. "How do you create paradoxes that can't be resolved?" The alternate Temrian stepped forward, its stabilized form radiating calm certainty. "By refusing to choose," it said. "Every decision creates a branching timeline. The retroarchitect harvests those branches by forcing reality to collapse into a single outcome. But what if we create a decision that can never be made?" It gestured to the walls around them, where the cracks in reality were widening. "We've constructed a scenario where the archive must choose between preserving itself and completing its harvest of the galaxy. But the choice is constructed so that either option leads to the same paradox. If it preserves itself, it validates the timeline where it was never built. If it completes the harvest, it destroys the very information it seeks to preserve." "A temporal Ouroboros," Vexera breathed, "the snake eating its own tail." "Precisely," the older Taylor said, "and while the retroarchitects are caught in a logical loop, we have a window to escape, and to ensure that this timeline is the one that becomes real." Alarms continued to sound throughout the inverse archive, and through the transparent walls, Taylor could see the retroarchitects themselves beginning to appear. Not one, but dozens of them, their impossible forms converging on a laboratory where the paradox was strongest. "They're coming," the alternate Zephyr warned, its data form rippling with defensive algorithms. "We need to reach the core of the inverse archive and activate the paradox engine before they can resolve the contradiction." "Where's the core?" Taylor asked. "At the center of your ship," the older Taylor replied. "The Chronos keepsake was pulled into this place because it contained the quantum databases necessary to construct the engine. We've been building it inside your own systems, using the archive's own temporal research." The laboratory around them shuddered as the first retroarchitect arrived, its form a writhing mass of crystallized causality that hurt to look at directly. When it spoke, its voice came from all directions simultaneously, a harmony of past and future that made reality itself vibrate. "Paradox detected," it said, its attention focusing on the growing cracks in space-time. "Temporal integrity compromised. Resolution required." "You can't resolve this one," the older Taylor said, stepping forward to face the cosmic being. "We've created a logical impossibility that feeds on itself. Every attempt to fix it makes it stronger." The retroarchitect's form shifted, cycling through configurations as it processed the problem. For a moment, Taylor glimpsed something that might have been its original appearance, a being of pure intellect, beautiful and terrible in its transcendent understanding. But that glimpse was quickly overwhelmed by the paradox it was trying to resolve, its form fracturing into multiple possibilities that couldn't coexist. "Impossible," it said, but its voice now carried undertones of uncertainty. "All paradoxes have resolution. All contradictions can be harmonized through sufficient data processing. Not this one, the alternate Temrian said calmly. This paradox is self-referential. It's a question that changes based on the answer you give it. To demonstrate, it activated another crystallized equation, and suddenly the space around them filled with floating text. Not words, but pure concept that wrote themselves into reality. If this statement is true, then the inverse archive never existed. If this statement is false, then the inverse archive never existed. What is the truth value of this statement? The retro-architect's form convulsed as it tried to process the logical loop. Around them, the impossible architecture of the inverse archive began to crack and buckle as the being's consciousness struggled with the unresolvable contradiction. Now, the older Taylor shouted. While it's distracted, the group of temporal refugees ran through corridors that were no longer quite solid, their forms becoming translucent as the paradox spread to the structure of the inverse archive. Behind them, more retro-architects were arriving, their collective consciousness bringing tremendous processing power to bear on the logical problem. But each attempt to solve it only made it more complex. They ran through rooms that had become museums of impossible things. Galleries where cause preceded effect, libraries where books read their readers, laboratories where experiments conducted themselves. The inverse archive was collapsing inward as its fundamental contradictions were exposed, but was also expanding outward as those contradictions created new possibilities. There! The alternate Vexera pointed to a corridor that led toward the center of the structure. The Chronos keepsake should be just ahead. But as they rounded the corner, they found their path blocked by another retro-architect, one that seemed somehow more real than the others, its form stable despite the chaos around them. "You will not proceed," it said, its voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "The preservation of all timelines requires the completion of the archive. All timelines except the ones you destroyed," Taylor said, stepping forward to face the being. Destroyed? No. Transformed, perfected, freed from the tyranny of linear time. The retro-architect gestured to the walls around them, where ghostly images showed glimpses of the civilization stored in the archive. They exist now in eternal moment, forever preserved at the height of their achievement. They exist as data, the older Taylor countered, as information without consciousness, knowledge without understanding. You've turned them into books and called it immortality. What is consciousness but information processing? What is understanding but pattern recognition? We have given them existence beyond the limitations of matter and energy. Then prove it, Taylor said suddenly, an idea forming. If they're truly conscious, truly alive in there, then let them choose. Let them decide whether they want to remain in your archive or return to linear time. The retro-architect paused, its form flickering with uncertainty. They cannot choose. They are information. Data does not have preferences. But consciousness does, the alternate Temrian observed. And if they're conscious as you claim, then they should be able to express preferences. Unless you're admitting that what you created isn't actually preservation, it's just sophisticated storage. For the first time since Taylor had encountered the retro-architects, one of them seemed genuinely uncertain. Its form cycled through different configurations, each one representing a different approach to the problem they had posed. We preserve the essence of consciousness, it said finally, the patterns that matter, the information that defines identity. But not the choice, Taylor pressed. Not the ability to grow, to change, to become something new. You preserve them like insects in amber, perfect, unchanging, and utterly dead. The retro-architect's form began to fracture, caught between its certainty in its mission and the logical implications of what Taylor was saying. Around them, the inverse archive shuddered as another fundamental contradiction was introduced into its structure. The archive preserves, it said, but its voice now carried harmonics of doubt. Preservation without growth is death, the older Taylor said gently. You've created the most perfect cemetery in the universe, but you've forgotten that life requires the possibility of change. The retro-architect let out a sound that might have been a scream or a revelation, and its form exploded into fractals of possibility. Through the gap it left behind, they could see the central chamber of the inverse archive, where the Chronos keepsake hung suspended in a web of temporal energy. Go! The alternate Zephyr shouted. The paradox cascade is accelerating. We have minutes at most before the whole structure collapses. They ran through the gap, leaving the fragmenting retroarchitect behind, and entered a space that defied all description. The central chamber existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, its geometry shifting between configurations that human minds couldn't fully process. At its heart, the Chronos keepsake had been transformed into something new. Its hull was now translucent, revealing internal structures that pulse with temporal energy. The paradox engine, the older Taylor said, approaching her ship with something like reverence. We've been building it piece by piece across multiple timelines, using quantum entanglement to synchronize construction even when the timelines were being harvested. What does it do? Taylor asked. It creates a timeline that shouldn't exist, the alternate Vexera explained. A timeline where the inverse archive was never built, where the retroarchitects never evolved beyond linear time, where the galaxy continues its natural development. But if that timeline becomes real, Taylor realized, then we never built the engine in the first place. It's another paradox. The ultimate paradox, the older Taylor agreed, a self-negating solution that destroys a problem by preventing it from ever existing. The retroarchitects won't be able to resolve it, because resolving it would require them to not exist. They entered the transformed ship, and Taylor gasped at what she saw. The bridge had become a nexus of crystallized time, with temporal streams flowing through conduits that seemed to exist in 4 dimensions simultaneously. At the center of it all was a device that hurt to look at directly, a machine that existed in the space between cause and effect. The activation requires all versions of us, the alternate Temrine explained. We need representatives from every possible timeline to ensure the paradox is complete. And then, Taylor asked, then we cease to exist. The older Taylor said simply, all of us. The timeline we create will be one where none of this ever happened. The inverse archive will never be built. The retroarchitects will never transcend linear time. And you, the original you, will never receive the mission to investigate the black zone, because there won't be a black zone to investigate. But the galaxy will be safe, the alternate Vexera added. All the civilizations that would have been harvested will continue to exist, to grow, to choose their own destinies. Taylor looked around at the other versions of herself and her fellow archivists, beings who had fought across multiple timelines to reach this moment, knowing that their success would erase their own existence. Are we certain this will work? She asked. No, they all said in unison. But certainty is overrated. Sometimes the best solution is the one that nobody, not even gods who exist outside time, can predict. The paradox engine hummed to life as they took their positions around it, each alternate version contributing their unique temporal signature to the device. Around them, the inverse archive continued to collapse as the logical contradiction spread through its structure. Initiating temporal inversion, the older Taylor announced, paradox cascade in 3, 2, 1. The universe turned inside out.